danger. Everyone he meets, he stays a stranger. Read every move he makes, another chance he takes. Odds are he won't live to see tomorrow. Secret Asian man, secret Asian man.
Saying secret Asian man or secret agent man, I don't know. Welcome, my friends. Welcome to another episode of The Spy Who Loves Liberty with your host, Gregory Junkbond Carpenter. And today we've got a show and a half for you. We'll probably have two halves of a show to make a whole show. We're starting a little bit early. We got some logistical maneuverisms that have to happen later on. So we're starting a little bit early today. Hope we didn't catch too many folks off guard or off balance with that. We're broadcasting today from the People's Democratic Republic of Northern Virginia. We see liberty outside, but it is fleeting. And the reason for that, well, like most other things, is what people like to call fake news these days. And of course, there's a plethora of fake news, but it's been known historically as propaganda. Propaganda is propaganda, and we're going to try to break the mold on what propaganda does to people today by bringing them a good, healthy dose of truthisms and liberties. We've got Jeff at the Cerberus producer controls. Suzanne is somewhere off in the hinterlands, carving up and grinding up her elk, making happiness. And today we brought on a special guest. His name will be told to you in a moment, but let me give you a little background first. We're going to hold off a second because I think it builds the intensity. That's what it does. It builds the intensity and the anticipation. And that's going to be exciting for us today because we're going to be talking about Venezuela and what in God's name is really going on in Venezuela. You're going to get some information from the Washington Compost, the New York Slimes, and all these other, quote, media outlets. Now, they're not news anymore, right? They're media outlets. By changing the name of what they are, you see, it releases them from actually requiring to try to be honest and have integrity about what they report. When you report only parts of what's really out there and you don't give the whole story, then you deserve to be called a media outlet as opposed to a real news organization. Here, we're bringing you news. And you know why it's news? It's because, well, heck, you've never heard it before. And you're never going to hear this type of information be presented to you, backed up with sources, on any other, quote, media outlet. It's just not going to happen. So it's going to be news to you. And on the other hand, to our guest, Mr. Sander Kinzel, and myself, this is not news. This is something we happen to know quite a bit about. Now, Sander is compassionately known to the rest of the U.S. Army and the military as Booger. So we're going to address him as Booger today. And Booger, I hope you don't mind that at all.
I'm more used to it. As a matter of fact, I had commanders that did not even know my full name. They only knew Booger. So I'm used to it, brother. It's easy.
Well, there you go.
You know, I could call the general's office.
Yeah.
I could call the general's office, and I was usually guaranteed the first call back because the secretary would say, "Hey, 20 people called for you today, and one of them was named Booger." So, yeah.
See, that's an efficient way of getting yourself in with the big crowd there.
Yes, it
I
is.
like that. See, they don't respond when I say junk bond called. They're like, I don't want anything to do with a junk bond. But obviously, generals like to have their hands on Booger. Okay, so there you go, folks. I'm going to let Booger. Booger, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes here. Just tell everyone about your background and why Venezuela is important to you.
Okay, well, as you know, Greg, you and I have actually worked together in South America. I've been actually working as an advisor in Central and South America since 1984. And as things progressed down there, advising in multiple insurgencies, everything else, I kind of started to notice a common thread down there on this, which was the money, okay, the bankers.
Mhm.
And on Venezuela specifically, I have information that I'm coming out with because I feel it to be very relevant now. And nobody is asking, no one is getting the answer to what's going on in Venezuela because no one is asking the right question.
You know, that's the biggest
And the
problem we
right,
have is people actually are in a small little niche of what they think they can talk about and what's really important to ask. And people don't even, I don't think they ever get to the point of where they ask the right questions in 90% of these international and transregional political situations.
yeah, no one is really asking, okay, how did all this start? Where did Chavez's money come from? Why did he only spend 2 years in prison after committing treason and causing the death, I believe, 14 people? No one is asking those questions, and
And why did he get all of
that's what
his
we really.
political? Why did he get all of his political rights reinstated? Uh, I mean, full rights to hold office, to vote, to do anything he wanted to, as soon as he was let out of jail, right?
Correct. I mean, that's the real story on this, not the typical communism versus free enterprise. And it's just that's not the story. And it's not the typical story that Venezuela is falling apart because of socialism. That's not the story.
Right, right. It's a completely different twist because the news media collectively, again, are not actually getting into the bottom line. They're not actually uh, giving you the real truth on this. How many people out there knew that Chavez was in prison? How many people knew that he had all of his rights reinstated, everything, but he was found guilty of treason, locked up in a federal pound you in the boom prison. But then 2 years later, he was released. And then that's when the money started to flow, right, Booger?
Yes. And the trail, I actually tripped across the trail of the money. When I was actually working with the DCEP there, they're basically known as their political police or their secret police, the Directorate of Intelligence and Protective Services. I left there with more questions than anything. And what was interesting too was when I was working there, the Mossad was thick there in the DCEP, and they were openly functioning as Mossad agents. That I found very interesting.
That's actually a different twist on how they operate. So for the folks that don't know, the Mossad is the Israeli intelligence. And you're thinking to yourself, my goodness, wait a minute. The Israeli intelligence in Venezuela? Yeah, they were there, and there was a lot of them. They were on the ground, and it was open. And everybody, it would be like us sending a bunch of CIA guys down there and telling everybody that we had about 75, 125 CIA people in country, and then calling them out, kind of like you do on the Mickey Mouse Club, right? Here's a net. Hey, all right, CIA agent. All right. No. But the Mossad did that for some reason.
Yes, and the significance of that, I don't want to try to declare what I think the significance was.
Right.
There had to have been some significance to that. And, once again, that will be for someone doing an in-depth investigation into this whole thing to possibly figure out. It's whenever we were down there too, we were called in just 2 weeks after Chavez's failed coup. We were in the country of Panama, and we were told, hey, get ready to go as soon as possible. Ends up 2 weeks later, we're on the ground. And when we were there, we go to the DCEP headquarters. And what's interesting was some Air Force sergeants whose moral compasses were properly functioning did not arm the bombs that they were putting on Chavez's aircraft. And I specifically remember two of them. One of them was stuck between the floors in the DCEEP headquarters, still had the safety pin in the nose cone. Those pesky Air Force.
Oh, those silly following the regulations, and just morality got to him. You can't blow this guy up. Come on, we'll leave the safety pins in.
Yeah, they cut the remove before flight flags off, but left the safety pins in. And yeah, there's a lot of speculation, of course, on whether or not the coup would have succeeded had those bombs went off. But it's impossible to deny the key role that the DCEEP played in putting down Chavez's first coup, which Chavez was supposed to succeed, get in, tear up the Constitution so that the government would be unrestricted by constitutional law and could do like they're doing presently and squeeze the country as hard as was needed to make the bank payments internationally. That's what's going on today.
Right. And Venezuela has been defaulting on their international payments now for a while, right? It just hasn't started in the last year and a half. It's been going on.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So, you go ahead, Booger. I'll shut up.
Okay, I'll go ahead. Okay, well, you can actually go all the way back to when Obama declared Venezuela a clear and present danger to the United States. You'll look at that. That was when Maduro really kind of started falling behind on the loans. Because if you look historically, they have been remarkably good at paying back the loans. It's not until recently that they've been falling behind.
Right. So we have a situation here, folks, that has been building over a few years. It just didn't pop up overnight. And it is something that you need to be aware of, because this scenario is something that can be replicated in other countries. And we're going to talk to you in a little bit why that's such a dangerous thing. If you're just joining us now, this is the Cerberus Radio Network. You're listening to The Spy Who Loves Liberty with your host, Gregory Junkbond Carpenter, and my special guest, Sander Booger Kinsel, advisor, U.S. government advisor, and stealthy dude who's spent most of his time in Latin America. And we're talking about Venezuela and the real story of Venezuela, what's really happening, and what you probably don't realize is really going on. Now, right now, who is who's the vice president of Venezuela? I just had his name on the top of my head.
It's I think so. Yeah, you'll check that. Well, you'll want to check that out.
Yeah, I don't remember. But anyway, Rodriguez, Delcy Rodriguez. He was in charge of the intelligence organization, the Bolivarian Intelligence Service in Venezuela for a number of years, and had a lot of insight, and was actually hand chosen by the president to be his vice president a few years ago when Chavez passed away. And he's been, I don't want to say a little bit outspoken himself about what he considered to be American interference in their free economy system, right? So everybody knows that right now Venezuela is kind of a socialist nation, but they still had an open economy and a free economy that was functioning rather, not awesome, not great, but rather well in a semi-autonomous manner. And they were up to date on all their loans, and they had a lot of good things going for them. And then came around to, I think Obama declared them to be a threat in what, 2011, 2012. It's been a while, hasn't it, Booger?
Yes, I think it's more recent than that, but yeah, it's been a little while ago. I think he had like 2 years left on his term or something. Whenever he actually made that declaration, because he was able to take some steps to get them back in line. Yeah.
I like how you phrase that, get them in line. And that means get them to do what we wanted them to do, folks. That doesn't mean to help them regain their autonomy and their sovereignty as a free nation. No, it was to get them to do what we wanted to do. And what we wanted them to do was start to undermine the natural resources and the independent wealth of Venezuela. So let's start to talk about that a little bit. What we're looking at is we're looking at now. It's happening in real time. Is kind of a transfer of wealth out of Venezuela, isn't it?
Yes. And you're looking at what is going on here is the Chavez Maduro regime. They had basically an agreement with the banking cartels. This was what came out of my fateful time spent with the Syrian arms merchant that was a contact I needed in Buenos Aires. What it amounts to on it, yes, gosh, you never know which way things are going to turn when you request a contact.
Right.
But the way things are going on this is Maduro's regime, or Chavez regime, they can embezzle as much money as they can as long as they continue to make payments to the international banking cartel. And you kind of look at the proof of this going into, and they borrow and borrow and borrow. When quit borrowing and just make the payments on the debt you have, you're a wealthy country. Okay, but there is basically, it's a German-born director of a Swiss bank in Panama. Okay, in August of last year, basically his name is Matthias Kroll, and he pleaded guilty in Miami federal court to laundering embezzled funds from Venezuela's nationalized oil company for who? Two of Chavez's stepsons, 1.2 billion. Okay, now how many people could Chavez feed for that 1.2 billion of embezzled funds? And that's just one trick that we found out about from one group. Incredible.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And you consider 1.2 billion. For some of us here, we go out and we'll grab a coffee or something. I mean, that's just a drop in a bucket. But in Latin America, that's a lot of money. I think you have to pay like what, 0.8 billion for a Starbucks venti or something these days. But in Latin America, this is big money. I'm just joking. It's big money anywhere you go. 1.2 billion. You could, you probably wouldn't have to work for a few years of your life if you had that embezzled. And odds are they weren't planning on stopping the embezzlement. Now, folks, like Booger said, this is just one of the revenue streams that have been uncovered so far. So it's kind of a complicated scenario. So he found out from an arms dealer working a job in South America that the leaders of Venezuela they were given the thumbs up to embezzle funds. But they had to keep making their payments to the international cartel, to the American banking cartel, and to the international banking cartel. And he makes and this is a very good point you made, Booger, is that, if you stop making those payments, well, then all of a sudden the wealth in your country skyrockets. But they weren't going to settle for that because they want their cut. And I'm going to give a segue for a second back to what happened in Kuwait. This is the same scenario that happened back in 1990. What happened? Well, the Iraqis were angle drilling. They were drilling from their property and they were drilling under the border into Kuwait, tapping the Kuwaiti oil reserves, and then selling it on the international market. Saddam Hussein got a thumbs up from President Bush to do this. Saddam Hussein also went on to check with, excuse me, it was the other way around. The Kuwaitis were angle drilling into the Iraqi territory. And then, Saddam Hussein got authorization from President Bush to go and take out Kuwait. But Bush double crossed him and set it up so that he would, nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition. Well, they went and they double crossed Saddam Hussein, and they made him to be the bad guy. Now, we didn't have any more big enemies. We knew that was ending. This was the end of the Cold War. We were losing Russia as a big threat. So how better than to keep a large military on staff than to start another war?
Yes.
And that's, and that's what we did, right? We just went in there with impunity and built up this, quote, fake international coalition and started a freaking war. I don't understand how and we do it again here. We're starting a war here in Venezuela, different roadmap, but we're going to end up with the same results, aren't we, Booger?
Absolutely. I mean, and what we're going to do on this, we're going to go in and Americans are going to die. American taxpayers are going to be on the hook so that organizations like Goldman Sachs can collect on the bonds that they have bought. For example, report in May 27th, Nick Miroff did a very good article on this, and I believe it was in the Washington Post. Don't quote me on the article, okay? But in May 2017, Goldman Sachs acquired $2.8 billion, okay, in bonds from the Venezuelan state-run oil company at 31 cents on the dollar. And they are giving better rates now. They have, China, I believe, has bought $5 billion at 20 cents. Don't quote me on that. It's between 20 and 30 cents on the dollar. And we will go in, use American lives, taxpayers' money to stabilize the infrastructure of this country so that these financial institutions can come in and confiscate real wealth for the fake fiat money that they issued them.
Wow, that's amazing. So anybody out there doesn't know, excuse me, PDVSA, Petróleos de Venezuela, the Venezuelan state-owned oil company that Booger's talking about, they have total assets almost $200 billion. And here we're talking about something that is a very simple way to steal money out of a country by selling off part of the oil company at fractions cents on a dollar. It's like the old what was that movie? It's a Wonderful Life, where the old miser sitting in there said, "Old man Potter will give you 50 cents on the dollar for your share." Well, it's the same thing that's happening here with Goldman Sachs. They're sucking up the oil company in Venezuela, and they're going to own it eventually. And the thing that's funny here is we remember that Senator and former Governor Cortison of New Jersey was the CEO of Goldman Sachs for a time, with mafia links and all this other stuff. I mean, not a good dude. And Goldman Sachs has been linked to some of the strange money shifting around that went on when the World Trade Centers came down. Some of the what would you say? Some strange trades that were made on the floor of the Wall Street before 9/11. Before the day before 9/11, these trades were made through Goldman Sachs brokerage house. Now, I'm not saying that there is a correlation, I'm not saying there's a causation. Excuse me. Is there a correlation? Could be. We probably need more information than that. But I see that the common theme is that in Venezuela, the Mossad was there. In Kuwait, go figure, folks, the Mossad was there on the ground. And at 9/11, the Mossad was there. And we can get into that on another show, whether or not people are interested in that. But those guys, they were there at 9/11 too. So don't think for a second that other governments don't have interest in what's going on, what we're doing, and what's happening around the world, because they absolutely are interested in all this stuff too. So how much now did you say that they were? How much are they selling those stocks for from the oil company now, Booger?
It's
20 something cents.
As low as 20 cents. As low as 20 cents. I mean, and what it is here's just another example. How can you go wrong with this? Okay, there's a hedge fund, Finch Advisory. Okay, they lent $300 million to Venezuela in March of 2017. Guess what they received in hard assets to guarantee that 300 million, 1.3 billion. And Venezuela is going to default by intentional plan of the international banking cartel. All of these people are going to just pick up massive wealth. That simple.
Yeah, they're going to own that debt.
And no one's put.
Yeah, and the interesting thing here, folks, is that what are we doing in this country? Aren't we kind of doing the same thing? We're building this massive, massive, massive per capita debt, just like is unfolding in Venezuela right now. Now, theirs is kind of unfolding a lot faster than ours, I guess I'd say. And we have lots more people here to absorb a lot more debt over time. But we're doing the same thing here. We're losing our autonomy. We're losing our liberty because of the debt that we're under. And that's what these people in Venezuela are going through. They have no idea how much debt that they're going to realize in the next few years is going to be to each person per capita. The amount of debt is going to be tremendous. I don't know if it's as much as we in the States here per capita own now, but I know that they're going to be hurting real bad. They're already to the point of, and I don't like to say this, but I'll say it because people get a reference out of it. They're to the point of soup kitchens like in the Great Depression. Now, let me qualify that for a second. The Great Depression was not the greatest depression that this union has ever faced. The greatest depression we ever faced was the depression of 1920, 1921. All the numbers, all the statistics, all the figures match up and show and prove that the 1929 depression from the stock market crash was not the greatest depression in our history. The difference was that we ended up having a president who tried to manipulate the business and tried to manipulate the government in order to help support and get people out of it, as opposed to 10 years earlier, where Cool Calvin and the crew and Warren Harding let the natural cycle of the Depression run. They did not interfere. The Depression was over in a year and a half, and everybody was back to work and happy. And it was also
incredible.
It was also a testing ground too, because that was the first depression after the creation of the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve received a lot of flack for not manipulating interest rates and things like that in order to avoid the depression. And the depression still came, and there was a lot of criticism about it because that was the whole idea why they were created in the first place. And if they couldn't do that, well, then they went on and they tried to make the depression of 1929 not as bad as it was. And in doing so, they made it last for, over a decade. which, because it went into the recession, then went back into a depression, then into a recession. The end of the cycle was like the mid-late 40s or so. It wasn't even World War II that pulled us out of it. So don't fall for the fake narrative about the Great Depression either, folks. It wasn't that way. We did it to ourselves again, or I would say our national banking and international banking cartel did it to us. And again, who were the winners in that? Well, it was the bankers, because they all picked up everything that, like like the old guy in the Christmas movie. Old Mr. Potter just picked up everything for 50 cents on a dollar, and it didn't affect him at all. And here we are trying to stay alive, much like the folks in Venezuela right now. I tell you. So, what do you see as going to be the future of Venezuela here, Booger? I mean, how do you think this thing's going to go?
Well, we are going to go in to get the reins. We're going to militarily go in, I anticipate, because we have to get our people into that banking system. They're going to want to find out where some of the wealth has went. They're also going to want to the infrastructure has fallen apart. Mm-hmm. And all of these international bankers, they don't want to pay to put the infrastructure back up. Okay, so have the U.S. go in, U.S. soldiers, we get the infrastructure back up, and they can go in and capitalize on their investments. That is what I see going on. They're going to start tracking down all this embezzled money too, because they're going to want to try to track some of this real wealth back to the people that were allowed to embezzle it. They're going to come after those people too. And I find it incredible that all of these military commanders and police commanders retire from supporting Maduro to get jobs in the banking system where they can embezzle money. Okay, well, they're going to come after these guys. They're going to want that money back. And as you know, I have a house in the country of Panama. Mm-hmm. You can't sling a dead cat without hitting a Venezuelan refugee there. They're everywhere. And this whole idea that Maduro has any slight resemblance of popular support is utter insanity. It actually is. He's hated. I don't understand. I guess the news, they can go down there and do some different camera shots of a small gathering in favor of Chavez, not Chavez, but Maduro. But overall, wow, when I hear the people reporting that on the news, and we'll get into the elections in a little bit. Whoa, that's, as you know, Greg, that's a
party and a half.
Declaring those elections legitimate just because Jimmy Carter went down there and didn't see anything. It's insanity. But go ahead, brother.
Yeah, so
that's what I see happening.
So let's go a little bit here on. Let's talk about the legitimacy of the Chavez government. Tell us why you think or why you don't think the Chavez government is a legitimate government.
Well, you've got to go all the way back when you start talking about the legitimacy of the current government. Everyone wants to reference the latest election. No, right. You have to go all the way back to the coup attempt in 1992. Whenever he got out, got all those special favors, and received tons of cash with a lot of world-class political advisors. Where did it come from? That is outside illegal influence on a government's electoral process. Okay, when you have that. And if you really get into it, I mean, we'll start here. Like Sequoia was acquired. Sequoia was the largest U.S. voting machine company. Okay. They were acquired by Dominion Voting Systems and Smartmatic in 2005.
Right.
Now, this raised some eyebrows because 2004, these same voting machines were used to put Chavez in power.
Right.
Okay. And Smartmatic also teamed up with a Venezuelan software firm called Bitsa, that's BITZA, which was 28% owned by Chavez's government. Okay, these were the people involved in the election process. Now, the U.S. Election Assistance Committee in February of 2009, there was a CIA agent testified in Orlando, Florida. Okay, his name was Steve Stegall, that Chavez won the election, okay, by basically cheating. And what it is, there's some Venezuelan mathematicians challenged the results of the election with the machines, and they found a subtle algorithm is the way they described it, that adjusted the vote in Chavez's favor. Okay. And Chavez, of course, was anticipating this. So 1,000 voting machines, don't quote me on the 16,000 or 19,000 voting machines. 100 of them were clean because he knew the issue. So whenever everybody screams foul, he goes, okay, I'll let the commit random 100 machines. And Mr. Stegall testified that the 100 machines were already predetermined and they were clean. And
that's like getting ready for, that's like a soldier being ready for all different types of contingencies that might be out there. You know, as soon as you get out into the field, the whole plan changes sometimes, and you got to be ready to adapt to whatever you meet in the environment. Well, here it looks like Chavez was ready, willing, and able to supply them. So did he take how was he able to make sure that they got those 100 machines that he had cleaned?
Well, according to Mr. Stegall, there was a random number. There was a machine there that was going to generate the random numbers of the machine, according to his testimony. And once again, he testified right there in Orlando, Florida. That was where he testified. And he is a CIA cybersecurity expert. And he basically said they were rigged. That the machine that they used to generate the 100 machines to validate the election, that machine was rigged as well. Okay, so
wow, so he rigged the machine. So they rigged the machine that ran the algorithm to generate the quote random numbers, which selected the machines that were only the clean machines. So those would be the ones that were examined by the Voting Assistance Committee. Do I have that right?
Yes. That's according to Mr. Stegall's report. Okay. So you have an algorithm in all the voting machines, but then you have them in the voting machine to check the voting machines. And I guarantee you, Chavez did not come up with this idea.
A rock with lips doesn't have answers like that. That's for sure.
No. This and I mean, to sit there and say, "Whoa, that's got to be the only time they've done this." There's no way they would repeat it. It's incredible. And on the U.S., the danger on the U.S. side, these Sequoia voting machines that were being used to install dictators and banana republics are also used. Now, this information's a little dated, so it's probably more in 16 states in the U.S. So incredible. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah,
so
the same
we're using the same flawed process and the same machines.
Yep. Preferred to republic dictators worldwide. The Sequoia voting machine.
Folks, if you just tuned in, you're listening. If you just tuned in, you're on the Cerberus Radio Network here with your host, Gregory Junkbond Carpenter, the spy who loves liberty, and my special guest today, Booger, who's a now retired truth seeker and former U.S. advisor for overseas activities, specializing in the Latin America region. And we're talking about Venezuela and the insanity of what the public here has been fed and what the truth is on the ground in Venezuela. Now, Booger, have the folks down there, are they completely are they isolated like the people in China are? Is the internet still providing them information? Are they, is it still open down there for that stuff? Are they able to get news, or are they getting to the point where they're locked out, or they're just giving up on the intermittent?
Yes, because yes, I stay in contact with people in Venezuela, and unfortunately, imagine this, an Italian firm kind of hurt my reputation with the Venezuelan people a little bit, because they got a hold of us wanting us to do an emergency evacuation of some communications people in there. Mm-hmm. That were, I'm trying to remember, I think it was Digicel. I'm trying to remember the company. Do not quote me on that company name. But I got a hold of people in Venezuela. We had the whole thing set up to evacuate these people. And friends of mine in Venezuela that actually have positions in the government had put themselves in an awkward position to assist. And then they just decide not to do it because the price was too high. But talking to these guys, things are horrible in Venezuela. And if you go, for example, as a foreigner, if you go to try to get food in a restaurant, the people that own the restaurant will be reprimanded for feeding foreigners at the restaurant because their own people are starving. It is incredible. The amount of refugees coming across and everything. And I read on one article where some people were saying, oh, well, those aren't really Venezuelan refugees. They were people that were originally from Colombia or Panama that just moved back to Panama or Colombia. Mm-hmm. No, absolutely wrong. I find it amazing that no news outlet, and we could try this, is actually conducting interviews with people that were in the government in Venezuela. No one's inviting the Venezuelans to give their input on Venezuela. Isn't that remarkable?
Wow. And you would think that those would be the people that you would turn to in this type of a situation.
Yes. Nobody's doing it. And I think it's because they will not like what they're being told. The press will not like the information they're receiving.
So yeah, because you're going to have to control the message then, and you can't let that out outside the country, or let that message go out anywhere else. That I can understand. That's scary. Thinking that this is kind of a similar situation we're looking at here. Even we're rolling a lot slower, and we're not as depressed or down on our luck, or getting abused as much as the Venezuelans are right now, but we're doing the same thing. We're just slow rolling it, folks. So you got to understand that this is going to be us in a few years. We're going to be looking like Venezuela soon. We have a looming debt crisis with hundreds of trillions of dollars more. We owe more money than the whole created wealth on this planet now. How do you do that? That is a staggering figure to think of. And why aren't there more countries around the world that are collapsing? It's because we're feeding them. We're pumping them full of money. And the reason, in my opinion, is that you can only collapse and steal the natural resources of so many governments at a time if you're an international banker, right? This is what central banking does for you, folks. But you can only steal so many at a time. If you're collapsing too many governments at one time, then it becomes messy, and it's hard to keep up with it. Good example, Africa. Over and over again, the governments of Africa have been stood up, made unstable, and come crashing down time after time after time. I mean, realistically, come on. How long is the developing world going to keep developing? How long?
Good point.
I mean, come on. We came from our union here. Union of States came from a bunch of degenerates who were a bunch of violent alcoholics and extremely pious religious people, both ends. And we somehow ended up together in this big group. Now we got 330 million, third most populous political union organization in the world. And we wield our power and we throw it around just like we did years ago, just like we did to break free of England, just like we did, during the Civil War, killing 800,000 of our own people, just like we did in every war we've ever been in. George Carlin was right. We're warlike people. We like to fight. We do. When I was with I was assigned to the Australian Royal Infantry Regiment, Paratrooper Regiment, in Australia for a while. We would go out, we'd work during the day, do all your hard stuff and everything. And at nighttime, what would we do? We'd go to the little bar. And what's the first thing we do? Drink 2 or 3 Fosters or whatever beer they had at the time. I forget. There's something much better than Foster's. They didn't drink that, actually. I can't think of the beer that they drink in Australia. But and the next thing you know, everybody's fighting. And why are they fighting? Because they're infantry guys from Australia and the United States, and that's what we do. We fight. We fought.
Yeah.
And I don't know how long you fight for. You just keep going until the last bar stool is crushed, I guess, right? And then
it's
what
something
do you do?
to do.
Something to do. Yeah, pass the time. And then the next thing you know, you're all sitting down having a cigar and having a beer again. So, we're not always malicious in our fighting, but we are always fighting. And I'd like to state that our influence in Venezuela has been much like our influence since the Monroe Doctrine started, right? Why is all of Latin America so bloody poor? Well, part of it's because of us keeping them down. We've been giving payments to every Mexican president since the 1850s to have, or 1870s, to have them comply with doing things that we want them to do that are better for us than for them. And then we take them and protect them from their people. I mean, there's a long history of stuff like that too. Folks, again, you got to look, you got to find what's relevant and what's real out there. We're the ones doing it. So we have this kind of, and I'll use this phrase, I don't think it's ever been used before, but it's a soft imperialism. You've heard of soft tyranny. And this is soft imperialism. That's what the Monroe Doctrine did. That's what the Eisenhower Doctrine, the Truman Doctrine, all these things. It's a soft imperialism. It allows us to go out, touch other people, and then kind of like in a quiet way, manipulate, pull the strings in the background. Do we own you? We don't say that in public, but back in the corners in Washington, we kind of whisper about it a little bit and say, hey, we can get this dictator to do this, or we can get this Democratic Republic government to do that. And don't be fooled, folks, because we talk to dictators all the time. God knows we talk to the Queen of England. And she's a bloody stinking
Good
dictator. Constitutional monarchy, I get it, but she's a freaking queen. And then not every republic is a good republic. What happened during the Weimar Republic? Was that super awesome? Was that great? Was that the open free market running rampant? Hell, come on. Take off the rose-colored glasses and enter into the world of nightmares, because that's where we need to live. And we need to be there and make the nightmares stop by spreading the truth, folks. So I'm off my little... Go ahead, Booger.
No, you're on, brother. You remember you and I were talking one time. You could get rid of pick your enemy. Islam, Judaism, pick any race, get rid of it. Mm-hmm. Totally make that bad guy disappear from the planet. Mm-hmm. As long as we allow money to be fabricated out of thin air and loaned at interest, we will never be 1 inch closer to freedom. A new bad guy is going to be fabricated by creating debt out of thin air, loaning it to people. And I'm convinced if you really want to fix things, this may sound revolutionary, Greg, but I think outlawing the private ownership of banks is key. Everything has to fall under the treasury of that country, backed by hard assets. Okay. And banking becomes a nonprofit public service, and loaning money at interest is a capital offense.
Right. Yeah, that would be reinstate the usury laws, right?
Yes. That if you look at the core tool that, like you said, we use in this soft imperialism, what is it? Debt. And it's not just the US. You've got the City of London, you've got the Israeli banking dynasties, you have all of this. And then, you know, you look at two now, you've got the union, as you and I were talking about, of China, Israel, and Russia starting the Belt and Road Initiative. They're pouring trillions into that, which is more or less just going to completely bypass the United States as any type of any economic significance. And who's getting into Venezuela right now? Russia and China.
Russia and China. Right, exactly. They know a good business opportunity when they see it, right?
Oh, yeah, 20 cents on the dollar.
That's it. So we got to get our military down there as soon as possible to try to straighten this all out so we can get a cut of the pie too.
Yes. And I mean, it's the problem is actually simple to explain. It's just I think daily on the news, everyone is hit with so many complexities and distractions, they can never piece it together.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There's way too much. There's too many conflicting stories, and there's too much misguided information. I'll call it. You have a lot of people that are I mean, their intentions are good, but they've been fed a certain amount of story that now they're unwittingly helping the fake story push forward and reinforcing the narrative of what's happening because they're, quote, they're an objective contributor. You know, they're able to hold that specific position so that they can say on behalf of the storyteller, you know, they can say that I've reviewed everything, all the information, and everything looks completely legitimate to me. And that builds the deception story of the people who are skimming the money from every different facet, every single corner of Venezuela right now. Let's see, we're just about out of time. So, Booger, I'll give you a couple minutes, give you a minute or so. Just want to throw some final thoughts in for a wrap up.
Well, just basically explaining to everyone how these international banking dynasties actually make money. They create out of thin air, and this is being repeated. It has been repeated for hundreds of years. It's going on now, and it will go on in the future. They fabricate out of thin air digital money. They lend it at interest. And what they're really interested in is when the person actually defaults, that they have the paperwork that authorizes them to sequester the hard assets. That is how the money is finally made. Because when they're paying back digits in the computer with digits in the computer, it's not that big of a deal. But for example, too, the hard assets, China, that $5 billion loan that they gave them, Venezuela is paying China with oil. So there's your hard asset for something that does not exist.
The non-tangible.
Non-tangible, completely made up. And the Venezuelan people, they're not even pegging this right. Almost nobody down there is pegging it. They're doing the traditional, it's communism, it's socialism. That's why Venezuela is failing. No, it's not. It's crony capitalism, kleptocracy. I don't know, whatever. You could probably come up with a better definition than me, Greg.
You got a point that, not about me coming up with something, but you got a point on how the whole thing's working. It's the Western bankers, and I say that the New York, the London, the Tel Aviv bankers, Berlin bankers, all the big money guys. This is them, and the lines of profit go back to these folks too. But don't think they don't for a minute here. But it's these guys who are taking all of that, all of the wealth that they've created out of thin air, the fabricated wealth that doesn't exist. It's non-tangible, it's electronic, it's digital, it does not exist. And they're trading that for actual currency. They're trading it and they're raping Venezuela in the same way that numerous other countries around the world have had all of their natural resources ripped out of them over the last several decades. The international banking cartel has figured out, finally, how to completely rob all of the wealth from a population. And if you watch what's happening in Venezuela, folks, you're going to see that it's unfolding right before your very eyes.
Hey, Greg,
just think about that 20 cents on a dollar that Goldman Sachs is getting at 190 billion dollars. The Venezuela state-run oil company is going to be worth. Goldman Sachs is going to pay about $3 billion for it. That's it. Go ahead, Booger.
No, I mean, apart from going on and just giving mountains of evidence on the corruption, the embezzling in Venezuela, I mean, I think the Chavez's stepson's getting grabbed for the embezzling 1.2 billion. That right there should just put the capstone on what is going on down there and how much money the bankers are making. And I think we're on, brother.
Yeah, I think you're right, because, folks, if you're not watching the money, and I've said this many, many, many times, every office I worked in the U.S. government over my 30-something years of service, everybody has an office that is the follow the money office. And do you know why they all have one like that? Because that's where the evidence takes you every single time. You can go out and you can go out and somebody can give you a new car, or somebody can make you feel warm and happy inside or something. But until you want to, when you want to see the big stuff happening, you look for those transfers. You look for them consistently, and you look for them to go from places that you don't know to places you don't know. I mean, there's all kinds of anomalies that are going to pop up, but it's always, always, always about the money, because money will buy every single thing else. And that's what these guys do. They've got themselves set up. They've got themselves funding streams from all over the place. The same guys that are stealing the money out of Venezuela are financing. They're financing the international trafficking of women and children around the world. I hope you realize that. That's the type of people that we're dealing with here. Booger, I want to tell you, I appreciate you coming on and spending the hour with us here this morning. Thank you so much for stopping by.
Wow, it's been the hour that quick, man. Time, it flew right by. Had a lot of other stuff I wanted to cover, but hey, I think we kind of hit the nail on the head.
I think so. I hope we covered the essential points for everybody, so they understand what's really happening in Venezuela now. Again, folks, don't be fooled. When you look at the information, look at it objectively. Don't be like the useful idiots who just look at stuff and pass it on without giving it a good scrutinization. There's so much happening that's behind the curtain right now, but you can see it. Just pull that curtain back a little bit. For The Spy Who Loves Liberty, this is your host, Gregory Junkbond Carpenter, special guest Booger, and we thank you guys for stopping by. We love you all. God bless.